Oh boy, it's Trek time again, and oh boy, have I got some things to say about this week's episode of Strange New Worlds. I did not like this episode. I didn't hate it in the way that I found a lot of Discovery just unwatchably badly written, but I didn't like it in the same way that I don't like episodes of my otherwise deeply enjoyed Trek series faves like Next Gen, DS9, Voyager, and Enterprise. And while the first two episodes were very broadly praised, I feel like this one will split the fandom into a like it or hate it kind of situation. And sometimes that's great. It encourages debate and expansion of the issues involved. And sometimes it's hideous because it gets petty and childish. Hello again, I am Blunty, and let's find out which one it is together. First off, let's acknowledge that, if you'll excuse the exhausted vernacular here, your boy Blunty 100% called it last week. At the very end of my episode 2 video, I predicted this week's episode would be an Una-focused episode, and bam, got it right. Nailed it. Beautiful, insightful, clever. Although, in the best Trek traditions, it was also a full and proper ensemble episode as well. It's just that we learn a little bit more about Una than anyone else this time around, and she's sort of in charge of the ship while Pike's away. And on that subject of acquisition of knowledge, while I managed to keep my videos about episode 1 and episode 2 of Strange New Worlds pretty clean of spoilers for the most part, or at least the kind that would interfere with someone watching in the hopes of hearing that, yes, this new Star Trek show is indeed a Star Trek show that is worth watching, without the kind of bitter disappointment that Discovery delivered to the hearts and minds of some Trekkies out there. This time, though, it'll be muddier when it comes to spoilery stuff. There's things I want to touch on and explain that I just need some spoilery stuff for context. So, you have been thusly warned. Stay here so we can share our thoughts and reactions in the context of having viewed the episode first. So, Strange New Worlds, Season 1, Episode 3, Ghosts of Illyria. We jump into a fast-paced cold open, lovely. And this week we get the classic medical outbreak trope. So, we open to a landing party scuttering about on an abandoned colony world, a world of people who, in defiance of Federation rules, were genetically engineered and modified. And we're going to circle back to that can of worms in a moment because there's a lot to unpack. Anyway, the weather gets all kind of sci-fi electrical stormy, which of course in another classic Trek trope starts interfering with transporters and communication. Oh no. And again, in classic Trek trope style, most of the landing party gets beamed away safely enough with a little bit of, oh no, the transporters are getting a bit wibbly from the interference. I need more power. I'm giving it all she's got, kind of dancing for tension and obvious foreshadowing of what is to come for the two crew members not yet at the beam out site. Well, it's tricky now. Those two aren't here yet. What's going to happen next? You'll never guess. We do get a bit more of who, a couple of weeks ago, I learned a certain pocket of the Star Trek fandom have dubbed the Transporter Twink, which I love, also known as Chief Kyle. And at last, our sassy engineer Hammer gets more screen time and more stuff to do this week, once more in classic Trek style. He's a miracle-working engineer who is both arrogant and, in his case, a little more laid back than the usual arrogant engineer, and I really dig that. And sure, the miracle-working engineer can just pull a solution out of his ass at any given moment is a very overused trope in Trek, but frankly, it's the flagship of the fleet, and so of course you're going to sort of staff it with the cleverest bugger you can find, so that's fine. Anyway, Hammer does his thing and is briefly smug about it, and we soon find out that, oh no, the captain and Spock can't make it. The interference is too bad now. Spock too much time in getting a book that he couldn't have possibly come back for later, and Pike got his ass stuck in a dangerous storm's path, trying to get the big nerd back to the site on time. Nerds and their love of books. What are you going to do? So inconvenient. Anyway, so they're jammed up on the planet of the missing genetically engineered people. The storm that somehow reaches past the atmosphere of the planet has rolled in over them, and they have to go find somewhere to wait in a safe place for the storm just to pass on by. Classic Trek trope, classic narrative trope in general. Just trap two people in a room together and just let them characterize out. Anyway, Pike is annoyed and Spock just reads his book about the genetically augmented colonists like the huge nerd that he is, although he does take time to mock the captain slightly about Pike's nervous pacing back and forth, being unable to change the situation. He can't get back to the ship to help people. There's a medical emergency going on. He's stuck here. He can't do anything. He's feeling out of control. He doesn't like being out of control. He's the captain. He needs to do something, so he's pacing back and forth. And as someone who has recently undergone his own rather significant mental health crisis, Spock's failure to recognize this stealth-stemming behavior in Pike, and not just fail to recognize it, but openly deride and mock Pike for it, seems a bit shitty. Shitty in the writing and shitty of Spock as a character, although not necessarily out of character for Spock. I pace when I'm anxious sometimes. I've been mocked for my pacing when I'm anxious before, and it feels pretty shit to be made fun of like that for that behavior. Anyway, if you are new to Trek, this whole issue of humans meddling with their own DNA being taboo and in fact outlawed goes right back to OG Trek. Basically, once upon a time, a bunch of genetically engineered and augmented humans got all uppity about their obvious physical and mental superiority, decided they should inherit the Earth and be in charge of stuff, because, you know, they're just better than everybody else. One of them managed to take over a quarter of the planet, instituted a wildly oppressive regime, and sparked a series of wars that nearly burned down the whole damn planet. It's called, in Trek canon, the Eugenics Wars. In the original timeline of the 1960 show, the Eugenics Wars happened in the early 1990s. The concept of it all, like many things in Trek, was born out of a want to comment on real-world and real-life events and socio-political movements. In this case, in the 1940s, you know, around that time where there was a lot of military activity in Europe because some jackass with a tiny mustache was all convinced that certain people were just kind of better and more worthy to be people than the other people who he considered just a bit lesser, to such an extent that forced sterilization to stop them multiplying and flat-out genocide was his obvious answer to that issue of good people and useless people. Well, there was a thing called the American Eugenics Movement at the same time that all that was going on in Europe. A bunch of people who figured they could just engineer some kind of perfect and ideal human race and society by selectively breeding out the undesirable traits. I'll give you one guess what the breeding stock for this idea looked like. Pale skin for a start. Are you shocked? And this wasn't just a fringe movement. There were laws that were enacted in 30 states that legalized forced sterilizations of individuals that had mental or physical defects, and legally prohibited couples of mixed race from marrying and breeding. So, you know, good old wholesome traditional family values and American freedom at work. So glad we're past that kind of ludicrous bigotry and petty ignorant hatred, right? And there's no current political bodies desperately trying to make certain kinds of human existence a literal crime and making laws to control reproductive rights. Phew, dodge that bullet, we've come so far as a society. Anyway, back in the Star Trek world, the issue of the augments, the Eugenics Wars, and the Federation ban on genetic engineering in humans has been touched on in every classic iteration of the property. But the leader of the augments during the Eugenics Wars was a bloke called Khan Noonien Singh. And yes, it's that Khan that even non-Trekkies know because, you know, memes and Shatner. So that Khan, that Noonien Singh. And there's a Noonien Singh on the Enterprise, La'an. We met her in episode 1, and even before the series started, it was confirmed that yes, she is indeed related directly somehow to that Noonien Singh. And this week we find out, well, it was all just some J.J. Abrams style bait and switch. The fandom were all like, huh? Well, what's the story there? I mean, she's related to Khan, but if she's blood related to Khan, that means she's carrying at least a few scraps of augment DNA around, and that basically is illegal in the Federation. Certainly it'll bar her from serving in Starfleet because, well, of all the war and the death and the superior ability breeding superior ambition stuff, it's just, no. But hey, rules about genetic engineering a human to be better and smarter and faster and stronger and more agile in fear that their arrogance and self-superiority will lead them down the path of violence and racism. Well, rules are for boring dorks who don't know how cool breaking rules feels. I mean, so long as you're one of the useful ones and are nice and calm and submissive, and just kind of lie about it your whole damn life and career, you'll be fine, right? Julian Bashir? Or, Julian, if they are genetic tinkering experiments gone wrong to such an extent they become hackneyed cliche stand-ins for various mental health and neurodivergent behaviours and are permanently institutionalised instead of, you know, helped to integrate into society, but they can be useful in their own little freak of science way, so yay! They have value as sentient beings at last, but they still get to be imprisoned, restricted, suppressed and infantilized, but because they're so useful to normal people, this in this one instance, now the normals will tolerate these scary freaks' inability to conform to social expectations and making people feel awkward and weird for exactly as long as they remain useful and exploitable. They will be tolerated at least. Trek, for all of its efforts to be progressive, frequently stumbles over issues like that one. So, back to the episode. Turns out another classic Trek thing happens. The away team brought back some mysterious, unknown, undiscovered weirdo disease that is somehow spreading to the whole crew, and they're not really sure understanding how it's spreading. It's threatening the safety of the crew and the ship as a whole. Classic Trek trope. The symptom? Well, everyone turns into a moth brain, and every light becomes an irresistible source of joygasms. So compelled to seek out the bright lights are the infected. A bunch of the crew managed to injure themselves in super dumb and super impractical attempts to get bright light in their faces. Like, instead of just turning up the lights or replicating more light sources, some of them just smash their faces into light fixtures because the frosted glass is dissipating the light source slightly. Or if you're clever and an engineer, maybe instead of building more lights, you decide the best solution is to use the transporters, which still can't collect the captain and Pike, but can still suck up a piece of the molten mantle of the planet itself, which in its molten superheated state incandesces and therefore produces light. It's all very, very, very dumb and very, very, very Star Trek. Now, every classic Star Trek show has at least 2 or 3 episodes just like this. A rapidly spreading mysterious plague, usually one which turns people into wildly stupid idiots or otherwise makes them dangerous. One of Voyager's was especially stupid. The one that made everyone drunk and horny from Next Gen, itself a rehash from one of the original series stories, was just goofy and stupid. And well, there's others we don't like to talk about so much. Anyway, Dr. Beardface is baffled, and Nurse Chapel is just kind of sassy in her very special generalized way, and Una has an insect trap moment in her quarters. She turns up the lights in her room and oh no, she's fallen to it as well. But then she turns lava lamp for a moment and is somehow immune to the call of the light from here on in. That was weird. There's the bait and switch. This whole time it turns out Una is the genetically modified liar in the flock. The big fat fandom beta that is young Miss Nunyan Singh over there, well, it turns out she's just regular human flavor human, and because of her name though, and her family history, she was teased a whole bunch as a kid, because the Eugenics War, being an important moment in history, is taught in schools, alongside a healthy serving of indoctrination of distrust and hatred for augmented humans, because they're the dangerous ones, they're the dangerous people, they're the wrong sort of people. And here's the meat of the morality curry we're dining on in this week's episode. It's about systemic and indoctrinated bigotry based on what people are, even if they've not made a choice about that in the first place, about internalized shame and self-hatred, about bigotry turning into violence, and about fear of the different. Back on planet GMO, Spock, nose deep in wildly impractical books with cylindrical screens, is reading about the colonists, the missing colonists, and how they were from a group called the Illyrians, and unlike the Augments that started the bigotry war, these folks only genetically modify themselves not for better, faster, stronger, superior reasons, but because it seems like an easier, more efficient idea than terraforming an entire planet to make it suitable for them. Instead, they make themselves more suitable for the planet's conditions. Sensible enough, really. I mean, we do that right now in this world, in the real world. It's happening right now. It's been happening for decades. Genetically fiddling with crop plants to make them more drought resistant, to grow larger yields, or to produce natural insecticides. We do this by selectively crossbreeding. We do this by introducing genes from other plant genomes into existing plant genomes. We do it in a bunch of different ways, but we've been doing it for ages now. And agriculture as it stands wouldn't be possible without us doing that. But as genetic meddling like that in people is against the Federation rules, these people are outcasts. But these Illyrians here, well, they've decided that, hey, let's hit Control-Z a whole bunch to undo all of our genetic survival party tricks, get back to baseline human, and ask to join the Federation so we cannot be treated like vile, disgusting, morally repugnant freaks and monsters by the Federation. We need to change to make them happy. The way we are is unacceptable, so we have to change to suit them. That's a cool message. Bit of a mixed message to be sure though. On the one hand, the Federation is all about that old Vulcan classic of infinite diversity in infinite combinations. And hey, we're all different species and cultures with various beliefs and values and understandings, but if we work together in acceptance and understanding of one another and to a common goal, we can do awesome stuff. All nice and peaceful like. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Check out this machine that makes infinite food, infinite clothing, and infinite medicine from thin air. It runs on antimatter batteries that could tear apart every shred of matter on this ship if things go wrong a little bit. But it can make 4 cakes at once and unlimited booze. We live in a utopian paradise. On the other hand, these same people are all, oh, you used medical science to make your brain work better, or to make breathing easier on a planet whose atmosphere is a little bit tricky, a little bit more hostile than we're designed for, really, so you can live there like a normal person lives on a normal planet? You vile and repugnant monster! Shun and banishment for you! No! So, the episode dives in a bit on all of that, revealing Una's heritage as an Illyrian herself, although not one of the ones from this colony, a different one, and how it means her body has a kooky immune system. Not one that makes just like better antibodies to fight disease, but a kind of thing that microwaves the sickness away by literally cooking them and running a fever so hot it makes her internal organs incandesce. Now, that's sensible. That seems like a medically sound route to go. I don't know. I'm giving up at this point. We are deep into some very, very soft and squidgy sci-fi at this point in time. So deep that we figure out the disease screaming through the crew is spread by riding on light. And this clue comes from when Uhura isn't infected because she took a nap in the dark, between all her other times being in the light and open to the infection just like the rest of the crew. But she took a quick nap in the dark, and that somehow protected her, and protected her after the nap as well. Which, oh dear Lord, we're in macrovirus levels of stupid here, but that's why the compulsion for light, because the disease wants more light to spread with, because that's how it spreads, and diseases, want to, that's why we sneeze when we have certain other diseases, because it helps the virus spread and propagate, and that's how it survives, and that's how evolution works. So, like a cordyceps fungus in ants, it hijacks the brain of the host and makes it seek out light, even try to irradiate itself with a warp reactor breach, which even dumber somehow. I mean, sure, that'd be very, very, very bright, but very briefly, as the ship tears itself apart, vaporizing everything and everyone, including the disease itself, in a blink of an eye. But the plot marches on. So, Una has immunity because she's an illegally genetically modified human, illegally enrolled in Starfleet, and illegally serving in the Federation. But the doc can't use Una's blood to make a cure for everybody else, because that's just not how it works. But even if it did work that way, that's also against the rules. Mixing augmented blood with normal human blood. But Doc and Chapel are all, yeah, rules are for dorks and nerds. We'll do it anyway. But oh no, we can't do it, because magic reasons your microwave body doesn't actually make antibodies that we can use to help other people. Oh well. Except somehow, after explaining for a few minutes in 3 different ways about how Una's immunity cannot be transferred in any way medically to anybody else, it just happens anyway, by accident, and without any medical intervention or even scientific reasoning. Her immunity is passed magically onto someone else because she was near them when there was a lot of flesh-melting, internal organ liquefying, deadly radiation around from an impending warp reactor breach. Even the computer is all like, yeah, this is enough radiation to insta-kill anything organic, so good luck with that. I wish I could help, but some jackass balked up the automatic safety protocols and systems, of which we probably should have a bunch of redundant ones, because this is a massive antimatter reactor, and yeah, the whole destroy the whole ship and everything around it in an instant of vaporization is a big it's a big deal we should kind of care about. Maybe an engineer could make a safety system that can't just be turned off by a single lunatic on a whim. So, with some magic passing for science, suddenly there is antibodies to a virus that rides on light, and the whole crew is cured. Hooray! And finally, we get to the bit where, with some personal log exposition, more classic Trek stuff, we have the point explained for people who didn't quite catch on yet, because the writers think they were being too subtle and really needed you to understand their clumsy metaphor by explaining it to you. See, in case you didn't catch on, it's about bigotry, about fear of the different. In this case, a genetically augmented person, Una, who it turns out is a big huge liar, who knew she wasn't supposed to be in Starfleet, who lied about it because she arrogantly decided those rules for dorks don't apply to her, and who only came clean when it was absolutely impossible to keep lying about it any longer, despite her efforts to, when she lied to the doctor's face when he was desperately trying to get ahead of the disease, crippling the whole crew, and then threatening a sad and probably traumatic end to all the lives on board in the vacuum of space, orbiting a dead colony planet. I think I might hate Una. She's a shit person. The captain, who survived the storm with Spock and the help of some very soft sci-fi electro ghosts that were probably a few of the colonists who got turned into NG ghosts because, well, The light disease made them walk into a deadly storm because the lightning is bright, and I think a wizard put a curse on them so they turned into lightning. I don't know. It's all very, very, very stupid at this point. Anyway, the captain is all, nah, Una, you're good. The rules of our society and our uniform Space Force organization that can only exist and function because of a clear chain of command and adherence to rules that keep everybody safe, well, rules continue to be for dorks and are optional for captains with smiles as charming as mine. You're fine. I'll deal with it. So what if you're an illegally genetically modified human, and by all rights and rules and regulations and laws, there's just no way you should be allowed to serve in Starfleet because, well, you know, there's a slippery slope of that genetic fiddling stuff that we're a bit worried about. I mean, they say you have to ban it all, just complete ban, because who's to decide which genetic fiddling is okay and which genetic fiddling is risking another superhuman Hitler guy? Best not to worry about it. Oh wait, didn't we use some genetic fiddling in episode 1 to change our whole biology to lie to a bunch of aliens? Oh no, that kind of genetic fiddling, that's okay, because that's the kind of gene editing that wears off. Science! So Una, bravely coming clean to the captain after she literally has no other option left but to stop lying like a big liar, is all, man, lucky I'm one of the good ones. Otherwise, I'd be on my way to a room full of very crisp and clean uniforms with cranky faces poking out of the top of them, career done, life over, shunning and convict colony in New Zealand for me then. But I'm one of the good ones. There's a fun little phrase you'll see often linked to racism, or even issues of things like neurodiversity. You know, there's the good and useful kind of autistic people, and then there's the autistic people that just make people uncomfortable. But it is all like, well, I was useful when I was exposed as a liar who lies and shouldn't be trusted because I've demonstrated I can and will lie for selfish reasons. I lied my whole career, but my lie was eventually useful in saving the day. Because if my lie didn't put me there, the ship everyone would have died. Yay for me! Oh when are we going to advance as a society that I, a genetically superior person in a position of authority and power aboard one of Starfleet's most powerful interstellar spaceships, the flagship of the fleet in fact, where my command comes second only to the captain himself, a position which I lied to obtain, and despite the many laws I've broken for years, the responsibility for which I just let my captain assume responsibility for, despite him playing no part in my lies to this point. When, oh when, can I stop being a victim? Oh, but at least now she's out and she can be herself, and yay, that's nice and healthy. But what about the ones who aren't useful, or the ones that are not good liars? What happens to them? Oh, the humanity and morality. It's a mess of a moral message. You can see what they were trying to paint a picture of, and how pervasive and systemic bigotry is kind of super duper crappy, and how difficult it is to deal with, and how personal ownership of like what makes you different, even if that makes you a target for bigotry, can feel better than hiding it does. But they really balk it up, like really bad. La'an takes a swipe at the other side of the coin. She shares a family tree with the reason there's a systemic bias against genetically augmented humans. But she's, I guess, normal somehow. Did the augment DNA get diluted enough through a couple of generations of interbreeding with normals? Does Starfleet just not care about that level of dilution? Anyway, but because she feels shame about what her ancestor did, and because she was teased and bullied and suffered prejudice as a kid about the facts of her history and her family name, she herself has internalized a deep and violent bigotry against augments, which we see on display as she tries to kick the living shit out of Una after discovering that she herself is genetically modified and has been lying about it all this time and being kind of getting away with it. She's angry that she lied to her about it. She's angry about the hypocrisy, angry that Una got away with it for so long, and angry because she has a deep-seating hatred of what human augments represent historically and how she herself has suffered for that legacy. That's pretty understandable, actually. Frankly, I'm just not sure why she didn't just change her name, because that's the only clue to it all. She clearly wants nothing to do with it. There's no pride in the name. She's not trying to reclaim it. I mean, there's a reason you don't meet many people wandering around introducing themselves as, "Hi, I'm Malcolm Hitler. I'm an accountant from Brisbane, and yeah, I'm totally related to that little German bugger. Want to talk about it?" I mean, hell, she could have just shortened her last name to Singh and it'd be fine. No one would blink twice at someone introduced as La'an Singh. But keeping the name of one of history's most notorious dictators whose oppressive regime suppressing individual freedoms and liberties led to a series of wars led by similarly superhuman augments that devastated large chunks of the entire planet of Earth. What could possibly go wrong with reminding people about that and how you're related to that person? There's a tertiary plotline too about Dockenberger keeping his sick daughter suspended in the buffer of the emergency medical transporter because she's real sick and incurable, and he's using the buffer to stop the disease progressing. This is also super duper dumb. Why turn the doc into a liar too? Why does he need to hide this in the first place? Why do it in such a risky way using the notoriously problem-prone transporters to a point that he denies essential and life-saving medically necessary protective upgrades to the equipment just because he's hiding his daughter in there? Why didn't he just place her into normal suspended animation? We know this tech is well established. It exists. It works. It has existed before spaceflight was a thing in the Trek universe. It works perfectly for many decades at this point. Khan himself used it when he and a bunch of his superhumans escaped imprisonment for their crimes by leaving Earth in suspended animation pods aboard a ship. Whoosh. It's all so dumb. So now the first officer and the head of medical are both liars and untrustworthy people who think rules put in place to protect other people just don't apply to them, and they will break those rules and regulations and laws and lie about them while putting other people at risk to selfishly protect their own secrets and lies. That's not very Starfleet, and both Una and the Doc are detestable people for doing that. Anyway, Episode 3 has a very muddied and clumsy whack at something other Trek shows have done a little more elegantly, or a lot more elegantly. It's filled with the plot holes and some truly bad character writing, and has set some very troubling precedents aboard the Enterprise. And the overall extremely soft sci-fi framing was difficult to sit with without smashing against the walls of my suspension of disbelief so much that it made a noise that made it hard to concentrate on the show. That said, both the poorly executed whack had dissection of socio-political morality with bigotry stand-ins, and the wildly stupid sci-fi MacGuffins were still very Star Trek in their own way. It, like the first 2 episodes of Strange New Worlds, plays well on well-worn tropes and beats from classic Star Trek eras. It's familiar Star Trek. It's just not very good Star Trek. There's worse episodes out there, much worse episodes out there. But if you're looking for a smarter Star Trek episode or two dealing with similar issues of systemic bigotry and tolerance, and whether or not one of the good ones is any kind of useful lens of which to paint this with, it's not. How about Voyager's Remember, or Nemesis, or Lineage, Deep Space Nine's Duet, maybe the Enterprise 2-parter Demons and Terra Prime, and probably the best example, rather less action-packed, but very strongly written and performed, Measure of a Man from Next Gen, one of the all-time greatest episodes of any Trek series, in my opinion. On the one hand, this was a far weaker episode than the first 2. On the other hand, it still is 100% Star Trek, classic Trek in look and feel and sound, and it plays like Trek. Not every episode of Star Trek can be in the pale moonlight. Sometimes we get Threshold instead. This, though, it's not Threshold. I'd put it around what? I mean, it's not as painfully dumb as Sub Rosa, but maybe Genesis. Kind of fun to watch in its own way, but also very stupid and very soft on the science part of sci-fi. I mean, Spider Barkley does whatever a badly written plot device does. Spider DNA in the mammalian genome. Sure, why not? It's not like that'd trigger an aneurysm in any biologist's brain. Anyway, to steal a gimmick from Josh Strife Hayes, I rate this episode 4 gasping amphibious Troys out of 10. Thanks for watching. Thanks as always to the patrons scrolling up above there. Let me know how much you enjoyed this episode, or how much you hated this episode, or how far off base or on base you think I am, or if maybe something I've said has reframed something for you here, because that's what Trek does best. It triggers interesting discussions. Hopefully this is one of those episodes, and not one of those episodes that turns into petty, childish belittling back and forth about how someone just didn't understand it properly. Thank you for watching. I am Blunty. I will catch you next time.